that I had 44 years at CBS News, 24 years in the anchor chair, and just while I would have hoped that it would end it somewhat better, that I moved on.
Dan Rather once made Richard Nixon sonervous that the president asked him if he was running for something. He broke stories that brought down administrations and exposed war crimes the Pentagon wanted buried. For decades, nobody could touch him. Then in 2004 he aired a story about George W. Bush that changed everything. Within weeks, producers were fired, executives resigned, and the man who had survived bullets in Vietnam found himself fighting for his own survival at CBS. What was in those documents? And why did one report destroy a 44-year career in just a few months? The real story is stranger than anyone remembers. Dan Rather grew up in Houston Heights at a time when life felt heavy for almost everyone around him. He was born in 1931, and when his family moved to Houston a few years later, they stepped into a neighborhood where most homes had no indoor plumbing and people struggled to put together even the simplest meals. His father worked 16-hour days digging ditches for oil pipelines and earned only $1 a day. His mother waited tables and sewed clothes to keep the family going. Their house had 4 walls and 2 bedrooms, and Dan shared a bed with his brother. When he looked across the street, he saw neighbors living under a tin roof on dirt floors. And sometimes she saw families with no place to sleep at all. In 1933, when he was 2, the economy hit Houston even harder. More than a quarter of the local workforce was unemployed, and the relief programs that were supposed to help often never reached the families who needed the most. Even so, his parents taught him that the only way forward was to work and to learn from whatever the world placed in front of him. His father smoked through the evenings while talking about world events, and those nightly conversations stirred a sense of curiosity in Dan that stayed with him. By the time he was 12, Dan was already chasing stories. He picked up bits off gossip from neighbors, listened to police scanners, and treated every sound he heard like the start of a lead. Sometimes he skipped school just to catch something urgent over the scanner. When he gathered enough notes, he sold the information to local reporters for a few coins. And each time he walked away with the feeling that he was getting closer to something bigger. By 1943, he could tell the difference between real emergencies and neighborhood rumors. In 1946, he got his first small scoop about a local burglary after hearing it unfold on the police radio. That moment gave him a tiny glimpse of what a reporter could become. His parents encouraged the hustle, especially his father, who believed that street smarts mattered far more than perfect grades. At John H. Reagan High School, Dan played football with hopes of earning a scholarship. But long nights spent listening to the radio and gathering stories made his grades slip. During the 1948 and 1949 school years, he played hard on the field. Though deep down he sensed that football might not carry him as far as journalism. In 1949, when it became clear that no scholarship was coming, he shifted his energy completely. He wrote for the school newspaper and covered local events with the same drive he had as a boy listening to scanners. He read every newspaper he could get his hands on, sometimes staying up past midnight following national and world stories. Reporters like Edward R. Murrow became his heroes. By 1950, when he graduated, he already had a job with the Associated Press in Huntsville at just 19. His father's nightly world discussions and his mother's love for reading had shaped him into someone who understood news in a way few teenagers did. When he started at Sam Houston State Teachers College in 1950, he carried that same energy with him. He studied journalism but also worked nights at KSM Radio in Huntsville. He wasn't just learning the craft, he was living it. He announced games, called high school football play-by-play, and even wandered into bar fights to grab details for crime stories. His schedule was intense, both thrived on the pressure. By his senior year, he was doing play-by-play for the University of Houston football team and covering baseball for the Texas League Houston Buffs. He learned to speak smoothly on air even when things went wrong. And that skill followed him into every job afterward. When he graduated in 1953, he already had years of real work behind him. In 1959, he found himself at KTR Radio in Houston when word came of a plane crash in Iowa. That crash took the lives of Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. Dan didn't wait for official statements. He hitchhiked 1,000 miles to reach the crash site and arrived before many national reporters that he talked to witnesses, gathered first-hand accounts, and sent back detailed reports while standing among the wreckage. The crash happened at 1 a.m. on February 3, 1959, and the investigators later pointed to poor weather briefings and limited instrument training as the main causes. Dan's reporting stood out because he got there fast and gave listeners a raw sense of what had happened. 2 years later, in September 1961, Hurricane Carla struck Texas while Dan was at KHU-TV. Instead of staying dry and safe, He reported from a basement studio that was already flooding, the water rising around him as he spoke. He worked long shifts and smoked constantly. Yet he always stayed with the story. He used live radar images with a transparent map of Texas over them. It was something Noon had done before. Those images convinced more than 350,000 people to evacuate. That evacuation saved thousands of lives because Carla destroyed entire neighborhoods, sweeping away homes until only foundations remained. Dan's work showed how powerful urgent reporting could be. When he joined KTRK-TV Houston in 1959, people quickly noticed how far he was willing to go to find news. He chased ambulances on a motorcycle to reach scenes before anyone else. He ran into protests and came out tear-gassed, still holding his notes. He covered everything from crimes to political speeches. His determination caught the eye of network executives, and by 1961 he was already on the path to national television. Even before that rise, he faced a major life choice. In 1957 he got accepted into law school but decided journalism mattered more to him. That same year he married John Goebel, who supported his long days and late nights, helping him type scripts and keeping his early years steady while he built his name. Law school would have offered stability, but he chose the harder road because news pulled him forward. Then came November 22, 1963. Dan was working as CBS's Southern correspondent when President Kennedy was shot in Dallas. He rushed to Parkland Hospital. At around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, doctors pronounced Kennedy dead. Dan pushed his way into the morgue to confirm the truth with his own eyes that he touched the president's body to verify his identity. It was a moment that shocked the world once he reported it. The staff was overwhelmed, and taking the body away before a forensic exam stirred legal controversy because Texas law required that exam. Dan was the first reporter to deliver a definite confirmation to the nation. His voice carried the weight of something that would shape history. Within hours, he identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the suspect. He moved between the Texas theater and police headquarters, gathering details, interviewing witnesses, and working past barriers put up by police and Secret Service agents. His reports gave the country its first clear picture of the unfolding tragedy. CBS promoted him, while the men beside him tried to shield him with their own bodies during broadcasts. The numbers told one story with more than 2,000 enemy soldiers killed and almost 300 Americans lost. But the look on Rather's face told another. His voice carried the fear and the exhaustion that people at home had never heard so clearly, and millions watched him become one of the most familiar faces of the war. As the years moved forward, he walked from war zones to the halls of power without losing that edge. On October 26, 1973, he faced President Nixon in a press conference that felt like a slow storm gathering after months of Watergate tension building in the air. Nixon's voice was sharp when he said, "Rather, if he was running for something, Rather did not step back." He answered with a calm question of his own, asking if Nixon was. The exchange hit live television and spread through the country in seconds. Nixon's team hardened their stance against him. Soon he was banned from more than 40 official events. But instead of stopping, he began slipping microphones into the Rose Garden to capture private conversations. Those recordings later helped reveal the pressure, fear, and panic building inside the White House. As impeachment started to feel inevitable, his push against power was not new. It had grown out of the years when he stood on the front lines of civil rights battles. In 1965, he was in Selma when tear gas filled the air and peaceful marchers were struck by Alabama troopers. He kept reporting through stinging eyes, showing the brutality the nation needed to see. 3 years later in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, fists from angry delegates caught him in the stomach as police clashed with protesters outside. Cameras captured him hitting the floor while Walter Cronkite's voice cut through the control room, calling the scene the work of thugs. And there were some people in civilian clothes, not police clothes, who had him by the arms, had his feet virtually off the floor, and they were quickly trying to escort him off the floor. This is Astry. Rather kept talking even as he pulled himself back up, and that moment stayed in the memory of viewers who were watching their trusted reporters get attacked in real time. His work often led him straight into the darkest stories. When he uncovered the truth about the My Ai massacre, where American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians on March 16, 1968, that he spoke about it with a clarity that shook the Pentagon. Graphic photographs and details went out of the public through his reports. The anger inside the Pentagon grew strong enough that officials began calling him Rather the Rat. But no nickname stopped him. His coverage pushed forward investigations and trials that otherwise might have been buried. His presence in Vietnam stretched far beyond one battlefield. He arrived in Hue City during the Tet Offensive in 1968. Though his war coverage had already begun in 1966 when he followed the 101st Airborne through the Boy Lloyd jungle in Hobo Wood, he spoke of heavy rucksacks, the pressure of ambushes, and the smell of death that clung to the air. On April 12, 1966, one of his reports showed the ruins and the bodies left after fighting, and millions watched him speak with a cigarette hanging from his lips. A small detail that made him feel brutally real to the people watching from their living rooms. That realism followed him into danger. On November 22, 1966, he was on a helicopter over the Myeong Delta when a rocket or anti-aircraft fire hit the aircraft and forced it down into the water. He had to swim through waters known for sharks while his notes and classified coordinates drifted away and sank out of reach. The fear stayed with him. He later talked about the feeling of being hunted in the water. And that moment became one of the closest brushes with death in his entire career. The stories never stopped. And in 1974, he broke open the truth behind the government's cover-up of Agent Orange. He interviewed veterans whose bodies carried the chemical's legacy in the form of melting skin and unbearable health problems. The Department of Defense had hidden the full truth, and his reporting forced the country to face the consequences of chemical warfare. Lawsuits came. CBS was dragged into court. But his work kept pushing the story forward until the suffering of the veterans could no longer be pushed aside. Those years carved deep lines into his personal life. His chain smoking grew worse and led to emphysema scares. The stress of constant danger followed him home, and in 1972 had divorced John. The strain of war and work finally breaking through. He married soon afterward, but the signs of burnout were clear. Even then, he held tightly to his belief that truth had to be told, no matter the cost. In 1975, the country watched him again as the Vietnam exit special aired to almost 50 million viewers. It unfolded during the final moments of the war as Saigon fell on April 30th, rather wept on camera. He called it America's shame and showed the faces of soldiers, refugees, and ordinary Vietnamese people trying to understand the end of an era. His tears turned into a moment viewers still remember because grief like that could not be staged. It came from someone who had lived the story. His rise through the Watergate years lifted him even higher. On August 5, 1974, he was the one who broke the news that Nixon had released the smoking gun tape, the recording from June 23, 1972, just days after the break-in. He worked with forensic audio experts to confirm it and helped the country hear the moment Nixon ordered the cover-up. He also pushed forward the investigation into the 18-minute gap that Rosemary Woods claimed she erased by accident. His work became part of the final push that led to Nixon's resignation on August 9, 1974. The clash continued. Vice President Spiro Agnew went after him publicly in 1973, calling him a commie stug, rather answered not with words but with reporting. He exposed Nixon's secret China diplomacy, revealing that Henry Kissinger had slipped into Beijing in July 1971 to negotiate hidden deals that bypassed Congress and the press. The story aired in 1974 and deepened the belief that the administration had created its own private world of secrets. Even after Nixon was gone, the tension didn't fade. When President Ford pardoned Nixon on September 8, 1974, Rather was first to break the inside story of Ford's reasoning. His reporting sparked ethics debates, congressional hearings, and long arguments about the power of a president to wipe away another president's crimes. His work on 60 Minutes carried the same force. In December 1975, he delivered the Chappaquiddick segment that drew 40 million viewers. It questioned Senator Ted Kennedy's account of the 1969 crash that killed Mary Jo Kopit. The recreation was dramatic, the questions sharp, and the impact immediate. Viewers were pulled in and public opinion shifted fast. He entered the 1980s with even more intensity. During Reagan's campaign and later through the Iran-Contra scandal, he pushed through every barrier. In 1985, he confronted officials about weapons secretly sold to Iran and money funneled to Nicaraguan rebels in violation of the law. The White House eventually had to face the Tower Commission investigation in 1987. Through all of it, Rather stayed firm, pressing, watching, and refusing to let political walls stop the truth from reaching the public. Dan Rather stepped into the anchor chair on March 9, 1981. And the moment he did, something in American living rooms shifted. He was taking over from Walter Cronkite, the trusted voice. His son, Dan Rather Jr. worked behind the scenes on the CBS broadcasts, helping in ways only family could. Rather also spent afternoons coaching Little League, blending into the stands so the focus stayed on the kids. He offered advice from the sidelines without letting fame interfere. It made him feel connected to something simple and real, and it showed another part of who he was. That sense of connection followed him into the new century. When 9/11 struck, Rather was already in New York, and instead of staying in a studio, he went straight to ground zero.